Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hive's protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us, and this being our second episode of our fourth season. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsors' support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And also check out Kirsten's new 2 Million Blossoms, the podcast, also available on her website or from wherever you download and listen to your podcast. Hey, Kim. It's finally summer. You enjoying the heat?
No, as a matter of fact. It's been warm. Ironically, it's cool here today, but it has been warm for lots and lots of days, and it makes yard work not fun, and it makes bee work not fun. And I'm sitting in here today when it's nice and cool, when I should be out there enjoying that cool weather. But here I am.
You know, it's really funny. In the Pacific, I've lived here for quite a few years, several years now, but I'm still always amazed every spring is that there's a very short spring period that you'd think about spring coming from the Midwest, and then it goes from like a drizzly, cool, what we experienced all winter, and all of a sudden it's sunny and hot. And that's what we experienced this last week. And we've been in temperatures in high 70s, 80s, and even hit 90. And they're talking about nearly 100 this coming week, which is just unheard of for the Pacific Northwest.
Well, thank your lucky stars.
No, that's true. That's true. But makes me think about the rest of the country,
yeah.
and people in the Southwest, in California, and throughout the Southeast. All these areas are hitting all the high temperatures. And folks who have not kept bees long, they don't understand how bees are managing the heat and have never seen a colony beard out front in the evening. What's your experience with the summer heat and bees bearding, et cetera?
We'll see bearding once in a while. A good trick to do that is to make sure that your entrance is wide open, and I prop up the cover and the inner cover, and maximize the possible ventilation. And if you've got the cover propped up and the inner cover propped up, or sometimes I'll just take the inner cover off and just prop up the cover, you don't see bearding as much because it does stay cooler in there, but then I've got lots of free time. So propping up 5,000 covers probably isn't going to work. But
I've always thought the bees handle the heat better than they do cold and wet.
It depends on the hive that they're in. The standard Langstroth hive, it has no insulative value, so it doesn't stay cool in that hive. If they're in a tree, it's going to stay cooler because you got better insulation on a 3-inch tree trunk wall than you do a 3/4 inch, plain pine or cedar board. So they handle the heat better when they're in the home they choose. In the home we choose, it tends to be a little harder to keep it cool inside.
Okay. Well, good point. I have slatted racks. I'm one of the rare people that use slatted racks on everything. I think that helps a little bit too.
Yep.
But on these really hot days, I'm going to start propping up the cover.
Yep. That's guaranteed to help.
Oh, absolutely. So everybody, we'd love to hear from you. What do you do for your bees on these super hot days? Send us an audio postcard using the voice memo feature of your iPhone or your Android phone or whatever you use. Or better yet, leave us a voicemail on our website by clicking on the little blue microphone icon in the lower right-hand corner. Let us know, and we'll share your thought on a future episode.
Yeah, good idea.
Hey, so Kim, today it is June 28th, and we just have a few more days for the Good Food Awards. They're taking entries for the honey competition. I think that ends here on June 30th, so folks can check the show notes for more information and even a discount code to save on their registration fee. Did you get your entries in?
No, I didn't again.
Well, you got a couple days.
Well, maybe, but probably not. I'm just behind on everything. It's been so hot, you know.
If it wasn't so hot, you wouldn't be inside and you could get some stuff done.
There you go. That's it. But if you're wherever it is you are listening to this, you've got 2 days to get your entry in. And if you've already extracted this year, make sure it's clean and follow all the rules and regs that you'll find on Good Food Awards webpage. And there's a link to that on our webpage. And get it in the mail. ASAP, because you got a chance to win Best Honey in America.
That'd be a nice label to have on a jar of honey.
Yes, it would.
Sitting. It would be. Hey, so Kim, and coming up, it sounds like a long ways off, but it'll be here before we know it. In October, there's a special event that you're familiar with.
Well, every year Bee Culture has, and our sponsor has what we started off several years ago calling our October event. And over the years, we've done had all sorts of people come in and talk about all kinds of topics. Last year, I think, was one of the best ones, or at least it was one of the most fun ones for me because I got to play AI Root. We had Langstroth in and we had CP Dadant, and we talked about the history of beekeeping. And it was a good time. We've had all of the writers from Bee Culture Magazine come in for a couple days, and you get to listen to all of them. So we've done that over the years. And interesting, you should mention that today, Jeff, because our guest today is going to be at the October event. That's October 1st through the 3rd in Medina. And you can find out lots more on their webpage. But Tammy Horn Potter is going to be one of the speakers this year, talking about what's going on in her part of the world and what she's been up to.
Fantastic. And that's October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Medina, Ohio. There is limited space. Is that correct?
Correct.
So encourage everybody to listen to upcoming episodes. We'll have more information about this year's event called Being Diverse, Inspiring Leaders in Beekeeping. Again, that is October 1st through the 3rd in Medina, Ohio, and there is limited space. So make sure you sign up early.
Yes, sign up early.
We'll have links and more information in our show notes.
Yep, and on Bee Culture's webpage also.
Kim, our guest today is Tammy Horn Potter, and we've had her on our show, I think, in her 2nd season.
Yeah, when she did her third book, we had her up. Her third book was Flower Power, and she was talking about getting the surface mines were closing, and she was working with the state government to get them planted in pollinator plants. Her first 2 books had been out already, and now she's got a 4th book out, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing from Tammy and getting caught up to what's going on in Kentucky with bees. All right. So before we get to that, you've been working hard on Honeybee Obscura with Dr. Jim too, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got a couple coming up that are going to be fun. One of the ones that we're going to talk about is going to be fun. It's we're going to look at some of the aspects of the winter loss survey. We're going to look in maybe a little bit more detail than they did, just because some of them are very interesting from a beekeeper's perspective. Backyard hobby beekeeper's perspective. So that's coming up, and we've got one coming up dealing with neighbors. Jim's life is going to change pretty soon in terms there's a development going up in his backyard, essentially. So he's going to have to look at how he's going to deal with his bee yard. So we're going to look at dealing with neighbors. So There's a lot coming up.
Yeah, the title of that one's called, at least the working title of that one is called Old Neighbors, and I wasn't sure whether that meant elderly neighbors or longtime neighbors.
Well,
So that'll be an interesting topic.
it's about neighbors and what you should and shouldn't do regarding neighbors and bees.
Oh, that'll be really good. And one of the upcoming episodes is one that is rarely discussed, is how do you kill a colony? How do you euthanize or put down a colony that is either diseased or is very aggressive?
Yeah, that was tough. It's fairly easy to do in terms of the physical labor involved. You know, two people can do it in 5 minutes, but killing a colony is you just used the term putting down, and foul brood is one of them. Aggressive bees is one of the reasons, and both of those sometimes have to be dealt with on a per colony basis. But if you have to put a colony down, suddenly you've got an empty box out there where that was a productive hive, and it can be hard to do. It can be an emotional experience, certainly. But we talk about how to do it, several ways to look at how to do it to accomplish it safely for the beekeeper and with a minimum of fuss for the bees.
Yeah. Well, you guys did a good job, and I encourage our listeners to tune in to honeybeeobscura.com and listen to Kim and Jim talk about all things honeybees. They do a fantastic job. All right, well, let's get to our interview with Tammy Horn Potter, but first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
And while you're out browsing Strong Microbials' website, make sure you subscribe to The Hive, their regular newsletter about all things honeybee, and receive regular updates and important information. So sitting across the Zoom table right now from us is Tammy Horn Potter. Tammy, welcome back to the show. You were here way back in our season 2, episode 3. So we've grown up quite a bit since you were last here. I hope you noticed the changes.
Thank you for inviting me.
You bet.
It's good to see you again, Tammy.
Tammy, we invited you here to talk to us about your latest book project. But since you are the state apiarist for the state of Kentucky, can you give us a little update on how the bees in Kentucky are doing this season?
Oh, this year has been phenomenal. We've had an extended swarm season. We've had some unusually cool weather in May. And so I think that has meant that bees have stayed inside and have begun their swarm preparations much sooner. And as I said, it's been extended. So people are still catching swarms everywhere, but that's a good thing. I think the hives have been healthy for the most part across the 120 counties that make up Kentucky, and I have been busy taking samples for the Honeybee Health Survey.
Oh, very good. So where are the most bees kept in Kentucky? Are they on the eastern side throughout or the western side? I know geologically it's different.
Oh, sure. It's at least, I mean, when I'm describing Kentucky, I explain it as 3 different states. And most of our commercial migratory beekeepers are in Western Kentucky. They do a lot of pollination for pumpkins and watermelon and canola. And then the bluegrass region, we have a lot of orchards and, beginning to get more soybeans and corn. Of course, people know Kentucky by its famous product, bourbon. So corn is one of our agricultural engines in the state. And then the eastern part of the state, of course, is mountainous. It's forest.
Yeah.
And so then we have much, and honey industry that's more based on black locust and tulip poplar and dogwoods, the trees that ends up kind of controlling and determining how successful beekeeping is in that part of the state.
I guess I didn't know Kentucky bourbon needed pollination.
Well, so corn typically doesn't, but if it is sold in Europe does, wants their corn to be, they don't want herbicides used on it. And so anyway, what ends up happening is that for distilleries that sell their product on the European market, they end up having to use a fungicide. So
well, Kim, if it helps the beekeepers of Kentucky, I will be happy to drink some fine bourbon. I'll do my part for the beekeepers of Kentucky.
Well, Tammy, we invited you here today because you've got a new book out. It's your fourth book. But before we get there, just briefly fill us in on the first three.
Okay, so the very first book that I wrote was published in 2005, and it's called Bees in America, How the Honeybee Shaped a Nation. And when I wrote that book, it's more of a social history and a cultural history. Of course, I tell people I was a horrible beekeeper at that point in time. I was much more interested in how different cultures had appropriated the image of a honeybee and used it to shape values, shape work ethics, in some cases shape religion, and of course our blues, our rock and roll. I'm thinking Muddy Waters, Stevie Ray Vaughan. These are all cultural markers. Now we have Beyonce, and she's our queen bee. We haven't gotten away from that. So the first book is a cultural history, and it comes up to basically 2002, prior to colony collapse disorder becoming this major international phenomena. And the second book is called Beeconomy: What Women and Bees Teach Us About Local Trade and Global Markets. And I wanted to just focus on the different types of hives that have been used throughout history. And I traveled to Europe and Africa and South America and Australia to meet women beekeepers so that people would have a more balanced, I think, in their minds, more balanced perceptions about who can be beekeepers and about the different types of hives that can be used to keep bees. Because I think many people think that there's just one type of hive and it has to be painted white and it has to, weigh 100 pounds. And and so I wanted to maybe interject some other pictures of that into the discussion. And then finally, the third book, Flower Power, which was when we talked last, was published in 2019. And that's about establishing pollinator habitat. At the time that I was working with surface mine sites from 2008 until 2014, the coal industry was still very much an economic engine in Eastern Kentucky. And of course, part of the issue of surface mining is that there do need to be reclamation practices put in place. And so I worked with coal companies to make sure that pollinator habitat was included in that. And so Larry Connor, of course, who is in charge of Wickbots Press, had asked me to compose a primer so that people who are wanting to do other kinds of large scale, maybe work with large scale extraction industries, solar panel power is beginning to take off now. And so we're starting to see a lot of interest in getting pollinator habitat on these large scale solar projects. So the third book is about is about establishing pollinator habitat and all the mistakes I made along the way.
3 very interesting topics using the same basis of bees and beekeeping.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
Your 4th book, I know, also uses bees and beekeeping, but it's a significantly different approach, I think.
It's a step away. I think for me, what was compelling about work I Knew I Must, which is basically a compilation of 2 memoirs. It's a factory woman named Jane Cole, who is working for AI Root, who many of your listeners will be familiar with, because not only does the Root Company publish Bee Culture, the magazine, it still is in production. It makes candles, and prior to making candles for the world, it also made beekeeping supplies and a whole host of other types of things. I mean, it was a true American factory. And A.I. Root also wrote a memoir about his experiences as a factory owner. And so Work I Knew I Must combines those 2 memoirs so that we get a factory worker and a factory owner's perspective, sometimes on the same events. And it also, of course, combines a woman's perspective with a man's perspective. And I think it's made for an interesting read. If you are interested in understanding more about the complexities of what it is to work in a factory and how difficult it is. Of all of my books, this is the most eccentric, I think. It's also the closest to my heart.
Well, there's quite a story in how you got this finally printed. When I was still editor of Bee Culture, we kind of started on this project and ran into several obstacles over the years that delayed its printing. But in the long run, I think the event that we had in Worcester a couple of years ago really made it better because we had to delay it. What you found in Worcester made the book, I think, a lot better.
So in 2019, at the Tri-County Beekeeping School held in Worcester, I happened to be sitting at a table signing copies of Bees in America and Beeconomy and Flower Power. And a gentleman approached me, and Kathy Summers, of course, spouse of Kim Flodham, had tipped him off that I was really interested in this woman named Jane Cole. And so this very tall man comes up to me and he introduces himself and he says, "I am the great nephew of Jane Cole." And I just, my jaw just dropped because I had been working on this manuscript, modernizing some of the language, correcting some of the sentences and the syntax, cutting out some of the fluff as an editor does, and also at the same time blending in AI Root's perspectives and memoirs and kind of working on this larger manuscript. But I had no pictures of Jane Cole. I had no sense of how to get in touch with her relatives. We didn't even know if they lived in the area there in Ohio or if they had moved on. And so as it turned out, as Kim says, in many ways, it was sort of fortuitous that the manuscript was delayed as long as it was in, finally being published, because we were able, the family has just embraced this project. They've shared photos of their beloved Jane Cole and have been very enthusiastic about its launch. And so in many ways, it's like, I feel like I had a chance to know something of this person who had, for many years just been a name on a page for a long time.
That must have been a goosebump moment when he introduced himself.
I think a eureka moment is more appropriate here.
More Lorenzo Langstroth. Sure. Because no one, not even Kathy knew. He just happened to be walking by and saw these different books about bee history that bee culture had. And he was like, well, my relative used to work for AI Root. This is when he was talking to Kathy. And Kathy said, well, really? And what was his name, I think? And he said, well, it was Jane Cole. It was a woman. And of course, I think in many ways, maybe Kathy is the one that may have also had a goosebump moment, because in essence, Kathy does Jane Cole's job. Jane Cole became the bookbinder person. And now, since Kim has retired, Kathy has stepped into the role of editor and working along with Jerry Hayes.
Wow, that's fantastic.
I guess briefly, tell the story of the book. Jane, this is sections of pieces of Jane Cole's life, and she started it just before she got married. She started her story about her life just before she got married, and until she retired, which is, I want to say, more than 40 years later. So
yeah, the book is titled 41 Years of Factory Life. And, in working on our book, I started with this old cowboy saying, which is, life is not in having a good hand, it's in playing a poor hand well. And so as you're reading this book, it's like, all right, let's look at what cards she had in her hand, right? She has a solid family. One of the things that comes through clearly in her book is her close relationship with an aunt named Maria Harrington, with whom she ends up living after she gets divorced, and they buy property together. And that is one of the indicators that of wealth in the United States, is if you can own land, which for women, the deck was significantly stacked in the late 19th century. She has a very strong faith, and that for her keeps her going. It keeps her grounded. And anytime she feels like there are these personalities at work inside the factory, or that there are some people who are working against her, she holds on to her faith. And then that leads to a third thing. She has her health for the most part. She doesn't drink. She doesn't smoke. There's a scene here where her ex-husband decides to remarry, and it's a telling sentence, because the guy says, well, your ex-husband decided to remarry, and the woman wants to improve herself. We can tell because she quit chewing tobacco. Right. Well, this was never part of Jane Cole's modus operandi. This was a woman who she did suffer illness, but and I'll get to that here in a second. But, she had her health, she owned land, and she had good, strong family ties. And so that buffers her from some of these uncertainties that happen with the other part. Okay, so what else is in her hand? So the next three things I'm going to talk about are things that really are become determiners, right? She marries and ends up getting a divorce. Now, in the United States, one of the predictors of wealth is that you get and stay married, right? But she ends up marrying somebody who has, we would call now, in the 1920 or 2021, we would say he has post-traumatic stress disorder. He was a Civil War vet. He's tended to want to move around a lot, didn't want to stay put. And then one morning, maybe, I don't know, Kim, stop me if I'm giving too much of the book away. And we're trying to encourage people to maybe want to read the book. So I don't want to give all of the endings away. But anyway, at some point, the marriage dissolves. There's a particularly unhappy night. And so she decides to get divorced. And I want to stress too, that in saying one of the predictors of wealth in the United States is that you get and stay married, this is not to say that people should stay in an abusive marriage, because there is a price to be paid for stress. So it's just, like I said, one of the predictors. So the other predictor that works against Jane Cole is that she would like to get an education. She knows that she would love to go to college, and her family simply will not support her in that decision. So the fact that she's not able to get an education will work against her through the course of her life. She ends up, as many of us do, getting an education, in dog-legged style. I think that's one of the reasons why she became such a good bookbinder for Bee Culture magazine in its early stages, because she could read and she could pick up these things. But it did work against her. She had wanted to become a teacher. She ended up suffering malaria. And so the third thing that works against her, and it works against her ability to accumulate wealth in the United States in the late 19th century, is sickness. One medical emergency can sink you. And she ended up landing herself a teaching position, but she became sick with malaria. And at that point in time, of course, it's caused by mosquitoes, and it, she was deathly ill. And so she had to give up that teaching appointment. And so then that meant, she's holding a poor hand. And the book, in my opinion, is how she plays that poor hand well. That's how, it's 41 years of making these choices and having to figure out workarounds. And so she starts with AI Root. After consulting with her family, they finally agreed to let her make an application to Mr. Root, who is a jewelry maker at this point in time. He's not making beekeeping supplies. So she goes to work for him. And then, those two have such a good, strong working relationship that, she stays loyal to the company. I think even when there are times that, he has moved on, he has retired. And so she's working for managers, and she's a manager. But it's a full lifetime's work to this particular company.
One of the interesting things that happened to AI when he was running his jewelry factory on the town square in Medina, when Jane had already started working for him, he was up on the second floor one day, and one of his coworkers was with him, or one of his employees was with him, and they were looking out the window, and a swarm flew by. And they both saw it, and AI, thinking that would be impossible, asked his employee, he says, if you can catch that swarm and bring it back to me secure in a box, I'll give you $1, which at the time was, like a week's wages or almost. So what he didn't know was that employee was a beekeeper. So the employee got his box, went out, caught the swarm, brought it back, and now here's AI Root with a box of bees, and now what do I do? And that opened that door for him, interestingly. He put him upstairs on the third floor by an open window, and of course, in a day they were gone. But that started his interest in bees and beekeeping. So she was close to being there at the beginning, but downstairs making jewelry, I imagine. Shortly after he got those bees, he found out that he needed to know more about them. So everybody he knew, he asked, what do you tell me what you know about bees and beekeeping. And of course, he just started driving people crazy. because there wasn't hardly anything written about it. So he said, okay, I got to go to a library. So he went up to the Cleveland Library, and there were 2 beekeeping books, and he looked at both of them, and he picked the one by Langstroth, The Hive and the Honeybee, and brought that home and devoured it, of course, and then was looking for more. But his factory upstairs on the 3rd floor continued to grow. Jane was downstairs making jewelry, and sometimes was upstairs helping making beekeeping equipment even then, running some of the equipment. Power equipment was almost non-existent, so a lot of the things were being done by hand. She was able to assemble some of the equipment and able to package and deliver orders to the post office and do those sorts of things. Then they built a factory down about 5 blocks away on what was then the county fairgrounds. And they bought the land, and the good thing about that factory, AI was very sharp on this. There were 2 railroads in town. There still are 2 railroads in town, one going northwest, one going north and south, and one going east and west, and they crossed, and he built this factory at the intersection of those 2 rail lines in Medina. so that no matter where an order had to go, he could send it there. He didn't have to send it someplace and have it transferred. He could have it delivered almost directly.
And Kim, we should back up. We should probably give listeners a sense of of the time period that we're talking. Jane gets divorced from her husband in 1869. She goes to work for Root in 1870, right? And that's when he has already set up his his jewelry making business on the courthouse square, and as you say, he's got this warehouse so that, she's down on the 1st floor making chains, and he's up on the top floor trying to figure out what to do with the swarm. And then the new factory gets built in the 1880s, so because I think sometimes when, if you're really interested in history, the past isn't even past. And so we forget that for most people who are listening to us right now, it's 2021. And so we're talking about late 19th century stuff here now.
I want to just refresh people where the AI root part of the story comes in. Is that before he retired, he spent a lot of time writing his autobiography. He wanted it to be printed after he died, and he died in, I want to say, 1923. And that's when they began publishing his autobiography, a chapter a month, for, I think it was pushing 3 years. He wrote a lot. He was. I'm envious of how much he was able to write. But so here's AI Root's autobiography of how he looked at factory life. And how he looked at dealing with people, dealing with women, dealing with children, all in family and all of that. And on the other side, you had Jane Cole's book on her, how she looked at the same thing through a very different set of eyes, and how what you did was join them, those 2 autobiographies. It's a fascinating read, because you get her story, and then you get his story, and you wonder if they were in the same state. Sometimes they looked at things so different.
And I thought it was interesting that her book was not published until 1924, the year after Mr. Root had died. And I wondered if she had a say in that, if that's just coincidence. But I just that's just one of those questions I had. But when you read the both of them together, the issues are still the same. I mean, it's the same issues that we talk about when we're talking about Jane and her, the cards that she's holding in her hand. We're the workforce issues. Mr. Root had this great saying, and it's a prayer. 2 words. And I have to say that I've read Mr. Root's writing so much now, I say the same prayers at times. It was, Lord help, Lord help, Lord help. And he said at some point, I know I was saying it so much, I was saying it involuntarily aloud. And I have been there. I understand that stress. But, safety issues, there are employees that get hurt. You don't get that so much in Mr. Root's writings. You get the names and the injuries in Jane Cole's writings. These are men that she knew. And not only that, but that she followed up with once they went home. She would deliver food. She got on first name basis with their wives. She followed them through the course of their recovery. Child labor, many people who may be listening, we take it for granted that there are child labor laws in our country, but they weren't passed until 1916. And so for a good 41 years, there are times when Jane Cole is a babysitter as much as she is, a bookbinder and and a jewelry maker and a person who's making honey extractors, because that's what she was doing at one point in time, when things got busy at the factory. You got issues of unions and pay and gossip. She has some of the best insights into how gossip can impact a workforce and its productivity. And of course, all of these issues are still current. For those of you who are listening to this, you may want to watch a documentary that's on Netflix right now called American Factory. Came out in 2019. Also set in Ohio, down in Dayton. Same issues. The very, very same issues.
The other thing I like, there's a busy season and there's a down season in making beekeeping supplies. And you try to get ahead of the game in late winter. You run like crazy in the spring, and by the end of summer, there's nothing going out the door because everybody's already got everything they want. And for a while, when Jane Cole was first working, she, like everybody else, or almost everybody else, always got laid off. And of course, there was no worker, there was no unemployment. You were just out of a job. And a lot of people couldn't live like that. They had to have a job, so they went someplace else. So the labor turnover was fairly high. Very soon, AI realized the value of Jane Cole and his establishment and almost never laid her off in the last part of the time that she was there. And do you remember the part? Oh, I'm sure you do. The part where she got laid off, and she got a job making Christmas decorations and selling them out of one of the stores in Medina, except the 2 days a week when AI needed her.
Oh yeah. Well, and not only that, I mean, that was one thing that she did. Another time when she was laid off, she went to work for a photographer who had lost his arm in the Civil War and started helping them with retouching photographs. And to me, that, again, when we talk about the hand that somebody holds, it was, she loved photography. She loved art. She became, she took classes. She learned how to draw and to paint. And so, yeah, I mean, AI had to go to the photographer and sweet talk her into coming back to the factory because she really enjoyed the photography.
Tammy, I think you did a good job of marrying these two documents. And John Root read your book, and he's a fourth generation Root, of course, and he just couldn't put it down.
Good.
It was fascinating for him. So if you can please John Root with this, I think anyone and everyone will enjoy reading this. It's a glimpse into a world that none of us know, of course, but know a little bit about. Now we know a lot more about. I enjoyed all of the time that we had working on it, even though it was extended. But it was a good subject, a good project, and thank you for considering us.
Oh, I thoroughly have enjoyed working on it, and I'm so pleased that it's finally published. And I'm also pleased that both Jane Cole's family and Mr. Root are pleased with it too. That's important as well.
It turned out quite well. The art that accompanies the book now, a lot of the Root people, the Root Factory people, Jane Cole, several photos. So you get a glimpse into what factory life was like, not only reading about it, but looking at the pictures. And of course, I can't go without mentioning the fact that we still publish and sell an eyewitness account of early American beekeeping, the autobiography of A.I. Root, so you can get his whole picture of how life was when he was running his factory and afterwards. He was involved in a lot of things other than bees and beekeeping, and some of them, of course, the most recent one to me interesting was a piece of the Wright brothers airplane went to Mars, and A.I. Root was good friends with the Wright brothers and published an account of the time that they flew, went out, turned around, and came back and landed where they started, which is the first real flight of an airplane. So all of this fell together nicely. Anything we missed, Tammy?
I just like to stress that A.I. Root was just the opposite of Jane Cole. He met his wife Sue at an early age. They got and stayed married. He had a good hard work ethic. He owned his property. When he writes his autobiography, it almost seems like a foregone success. He's everything that we think of as this sort of American success story. And when you read his autobiography, it seems there's so much. He's so prolific. He is such a prolific writer that I think reading Jane Cole reminds you of how hard it was, of how really difficult it was, and how nip and tuck it was. It was not this sort of foreordained conclusion that this factory was going to be a success.
We can get your first 3 books almost anywhere on Amazon or any of the other booksellers,
yep.
Correct? Right now, I know that your book, Work I Knew I Must, is available through Bee Culture Magazine.
That's correct.
And we will certainly have a link to that in the show notes and your other books. Tammy, this has been fun. This was a fun project, and you and I went through the long road. I'm glad it's over, but I enjoyed the trip. How's that?
Sure. I am too.
A great adventure. That sounds like a type 2 kind of fun. It's fun when it's over, and in retrospect.
Yeah, and the book is amazing. I encourage everyone to try and get a chance to read it. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Tammy. It's a pleasure having you on, and look forward to having you back. Hey, Kim, it's really great having Tammy back on the show. I can't believe it's been so long since she was last on in season 2, but it was great getting caught up on the state of affairs for bees in the state of Kentucky and on her latest project.
It's been a while. One of the things we didn't get to talk about today is that when we were working on this project, I invited her up to Medina to show her the places that she was writing about. So we went to the house that she and her aunt owned, which isn't there anymore, but now it's another building, but at least we were able to find the very lot that it sat on. We toured the oldest part of the factory where Jane would have been working. We went up to the town square where the jewelry store had been. But shortly after AI left the square, basically the whole town square burned down. So the building is there, but there's a plaque on the building that replaced it that said this was the site of the original factory. And then we got to visit AI's graveside and Jane Cole's graveside. So we got to see all of what was there, which was kind of special.
Yeah, and just for fun, I'll throw in the picture of me at the plaque that you just referenced to. One of the last times I was in Medina, I took a picture there. So there's a lot of great history there, Medina, and to have that connection or have that history written that Tammy was able to pull together from AI Roots, and then also from a lack of a better term, a commoner, if you will, of the time who worked with AI Root. That's a great perspective.
Yep, it was a fun project, and I'm glad it's. Like I said, I'm glad it was a lot of work, and I enjoyed the ride. But I'm glad it's done.
Yeah, type 2 fun, buddy. Type 2 fun. Okay, well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. You'd think I'd know this by now, Kim. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of this podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And we want to thank Better Bee for joining us as our latest supporter. Check out all their great beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. We could not do it without you being there. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else we should mention, Kim?
I think that wraps it up for this time, Jeff.
All right, sounds good. Take care, everybody.